Jimmy Webb is an acclaimed American songwriter, composer, and singer born in Elk City, Oklahoma in 1946. He is widely recognized as one of the most influential songwriters of his generation. Some of Jimmy's most famous songs are MacArthur Park, By the Time I Get to Phoenix, Galveston, and what I consider to be one of the greatest songs ever written, Wichita Lineman, which was written for Glen Campbell in 1968. I had the opportunity and honor of interviewing Jimmy at the Power Station at Berklee's New York City campus. Here's my interview. Jimmy, welcome.
Thank you.
Such an honor to meet you in person. I've been such a fan of yours for my entire life.
It's a little daunting to have been a part of your entire life.
That's a good thing.
But I'll take that on, I guess.
It's a good thing. I did an episode recently, a few months ago, where I featured Wichita Lineman, which I think is one of the all-time finest songs ever written.
Well, thank you.
Your song. How did Glen get a hold of this song?
Well, it has a very checkered history, that song, which I don't often talk about because it just seems like too much to take on. I was a contract writer at Joe Bett. Joe Bett is Motown's publishing arm, not in Detroit. I worked in LA. So I had a songwriting job there, and about my very first gig, not to put too fine a point on it, they steered their white axe towards me, and they treated me with the utmost kindness and respect and taught me really everything I know. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here doing this interview without Motown. And one of my very first cuts was on a B-side of a Supremes Christmas album called My Christmas Tree. So that was my first real score. They had an artist named Paul Peterson. He used to be a regular on the Donna Reed show. And he had that terrible double had quite a big record on the top 40 that summer called She Can't Find Her Keys, which was strictly a novelty record, taking a girl on a date. He's trying to take her home, but she can't find her keys. They brought him to me, and they said, so we're doing an album with Paul Peterson, and we need a song. I said, I'll write a song. I wrote By the Time I Get to Phoenix for Paul Peterson. So they went away for a little while, and they came back, and they said, well, look, don't take it, don't take it personal, but he really hates it,
This is the songwriting business.
I was like a 17-year-old kid.
Right.
So I'm just rolling with, hey, I'm in the big time, and I'm actually talking to these people. I was just glad to be there. Right. They stayed down where I come from. They passed it then on to Tony Martin, and I remember my father and my mother flying out from Oklahoma to the session, which is at Disney Recorders on Sunset Boulevard. And we had a full orchestra. Gene Page had done a wonderful arrangement, and Tony Martin, who was a big star to my parents.
Right. Yeah.
MGM, Betty Grable. I sat there that night and listened to this orchestra for the first time with my dad, playing one of my songs, and Tony Martin singing live, and French horns and strings, and this lush woodwinds, and it was just an overpowering experience. And I thought, well, this is it. I'm going to the top of the charts.
You made it.
Right? So that record never saw the light of day, and I parted company with Motown very amicably at one point to go over to Johnny Rivers' Soul City, and he offered me $100 a week. So I left Motown, and they said, well, listen, as long as you're going, Jimmy, we love you, so we want you to take whatever songs you want, because some of these we don't want it. So take that By the Time I Get to Phoenix. Take that one.
Oh, my God.
Take this Up, Up, and Away. Up, Up, and Away. We don't need that.
Oh, my God.
This Didn't we're not into that either. Take that. Gave me all these hit songs, and I walked out and went over to Johnny Rivers. And one of the first songs of mine that Johnny Rivers recorded was By the Time I Get to Phoenix.
Yeah.
Again, and I think, the session musicians are going, oh, God, here comes that song again. Johnny Rivers invited Glen Campbell and Al DeLory over to his studio to listen to a test pressing, and 3 songs in, I think, was By the Time I Get to Phoenix. And Johnny just lifted up the needle and said, before I put these, he said, I wanted you to hear this before I put the record out. He says, because I want you to put it out. I want you to record it and put it out. And Al and Glenn are kind of sitting there like this. And Glenn finally said, the story goes, Glenn finally said, well, I don't get it. And Johnny said, what? He said, how come you're giving us this hit song, you know? And Johnny said to Glenn, well, Glenn, you know, you can only have one number one song at a time. And Al DeLore and Glen Campbell took that song. And Al DeLore is the unsung hero behind this whole phenomenon of Webb, Campbell, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel kind of badly about that. He was a wonderful producer.
Yeah. He did some arrangements too, right?
But he was a gifted arranger.
Yes, yeah.
So that part of the longevity of something like Wichita Lineman, for instance, part of the longevity of it is the fact that he was a very avant-garde arranger in Hollywood. He was a minimalist before people were talking in terms of minimalism.
Yeah.
And he was that first. He was a very interesting character. The last time I talked to him, which was a few years before he died, he wasn't even interested in pop music anymore. He was writing serial music.
Okay. And you don't mean for cereals, you mean
I mean
atonal
with an
music.
S.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly, right.
Yeah. Well, I guess it is serial music if it's every Saturday afternoon, but this was a technical term that really applies to a certain family of compositions that really everyone hates. It's absolutely unlistenable. It was a non-starter serial music.
Right.
But 12-tone music was a big step forward, and you have an incredible leap into atonalities and dissonances with Debussy and Ravel and early 20th century music, which is really the golden era of classical music, no matter what anybody says. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
So my composers are Jean Sibelius, certainly Samuel Barber, very near the top, Ralph Vaughan Williams.
Oh, yeah, fantastic.
He was a real composer.
Yeah.
He just sort of happened to be traveling through this studio environment. So when you listen to his arranging, it's really quite unusual.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not like anybody else. I think one of the secrets of them is that there's a whole mythos that's working there, which is kind of the prairie Gothic thing of, like, by the time I get to Phoenix, or the Lineman, those lonely songs, that I call them flat country songs because you can see for 50 miles out there. You can. Well, DeLore, apparently, as I look back on it, I'm convinced he must have heard that in the music and resolved that the arrangement would enhance that endless horizon that you see out on the prairie.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be a lot of filigree. There wouldn't be a lot of rococo. There wouldn't be a lot of trills or runs or slides or trickery going on, right?
Right.
Not one glissando he wrote.
Right.
In all of those records. I think that kind of captures the background of the song.
How do you hear this stuff? Was the arrangement done and then you just hear it at the session, or how did things happen then?
First of all, it was whatever session it would pretty much be the same group of musicians.
Right.
So it was almost like a family that just saw too much of each other. Mm-hmm. But it was like in my case, it was, I knew Hal Blaine and Larry Knechtel from Motown, from sessions I'd done over there, and when I moved with Johnny used them all the time. So it was Hal Blaine, Carol, or Joe Osborne. They would switch out.
Okay.
So there would be people. There was a complexity to that unit. For instance, Sid Sharp is a violinist. He was really in the Wrecking Crew. He did all the strings for all their records, and so he was sort of an ad hoc member of that group. And there are other anomalies as well, like you have Bud Shank playing on the intro to California Dreamin'.
Yeah.
Also played a lot on the Fifth Dimension album, the first Up, Up and Away.
Yeah.
was a pure jazz guy.
Yeah.
There was a cast of characters. It was a movable feast. They were always the top-rated guys. When Johnny cut, by the time I get to Phoenix, he used them, and he used Marty Paish on strings.
Okay.
Marty was also a very tasteful arranger.
Oh, yeah.
Some of those lines, some of those lines are mirrored in Glen's record, but it is a completely different arrangement. Al did a completely different arrangement. But the first time they heard it with orchestra. So
right.
Obviously, we're going to have some influence on that session.
Yeah.
It's the same bunch of guys who are in there. You know, they're showing up. There's Larry and there's everybody. There's Hal, you know. It was an interesting time to be a Hollywood musician. It was so alive that, you know, these guys were living in mansions, you know. They were sidemen.
Right.
No one had ever seen anything like this in the music business. There's probably never been a better fed group of studio players than Glen originally as well.
Yes, yeah.
Tommy Tedesco. I remember one time in Western 3, and we were in there, Lou Adler was producing, it was a Johnny Rivers session. And it was summer and the air conditioner went out. But they just kept working. They said, we'll just work until the tubes blow. You know?
Right.
They're trying to get this take, and it's like take 62 or something. And finally, Hal sort of very, very theatrically, like, strips off his coat, strips off his shirt, takes off his undershirt. Now he's sitting there, hairy-chested, you know, drummer in the middle of a serious session.
Yeah.
And the sweat's pouring off him, and he's playing. And so Tommy Tedesco says, wait a minute. He says,
oh, no.
He gets up like this, and he unbuckles his trousers, and he drops them.
Oh, no.
He takes them off. He sits down, and they went on. They got the take. That was probably the take. He's sitting there in his underwear.
Amazing.
So, you know, it was, you know, it was hijinks. It was fun time to be around. There was a real demand for music. There was an insatiable demand for good songs. With a good song, you could go a long way.
Let me just play by the time I get to Phoenix so that people can see what we're talking about here, what you're talking about.
That's Bud.
By the time I get to Phoenix, she'll be rising. She'll find the note I left hanging on her door. She'll laugh when she reads the part that says I'm leaving. 'Cause I've left that girl.
It couldn't be any less.
So
Right.
many times before.
Glen is such a good singer.
Yeah, he was one of 3 or 4 people born a century.
To have a guy that's such a great singer and such an excellent musician, guitar player, this was kind of unusual, really, to be a virtuoso instrumentalist and be a fantastic singer and a personality, too.
There was something I just heard that I've never noticed before. These speakers are so good right here. And you could hear Bud Shank, the guy I was just talking about, who was a jazz player.
Yeah.
You can hear him riffing, but he has no presence on the mic. He's in deep echo.
Yeah.
And what it's doing is it's layering. So it's kind of watercoloring with the echo. Mm-hmm. And that is giving me a feeling like driving on the desert. Like with, you know, these strange wind, sounds in the wind, Lawrence of Arabia, that whole thing. That's what he was doing with that.
He's mimicking that idea.
He's giving you that idea of loneliness.
You being from Oklahoma, is that, do you think this is in your DNA?
Oh, I'm sure it is. I mean, I was born in Elk City, Oklahoma on Route 66, 12 miles up the road to Oklahoma City
Okay.
was Eric, and that's where Roger Miller was born.
Wow.
And that's Beckham County. And Toby Keith was born in Beckham County. A great writer named Michael Smotherman was born in, and Toby Keith jokes around. He says, it must be in the dirt, you know,
Right.
church music.
Yeah.
Everybody was into church music. And people don't have much to do in that part of the country except go to church. So we did a lot of it. And so I used to do things like when I learned, I'll just show you a little bit to show you how I got started. My mother engineered my passage into being a musician. And she wanted me to be the pianist at the First Baptist Church. And I made it by age 12.
Okay.
And I would play, I'd play the hymns out of the Baptist hymnal like this. Actually, that's pretty ornate. It's hard for me to actually approach the banality of these. See, that's too good.
Right.
The voicing is too good because these arrangements are not that good.
I love I love the spacings that you're doing right there.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I can't keep myself from doing it.
Right.
So I went to this piano teacher in the city just to get some arranging skills. And she taught me, I mean, in short order, she taught me substitution. She taught me to octaves and filling in. Really, I mean, kind of tedious sounding things. But the results are... Anyway,
Fantastic.
I can get completely lost in that sort of Liberace land, which is something that I kind of like to stay away from. But that's what I played in church. They love Liberace in church.
How would you go about learning this? Would she say, here's how you connect a chord passage?
She came in one day and she said, okay, I'd like for you to play your lesson, you know, and it was something like, you know. So I just kind of sat down and started. She said, okay. And she just swiped all the music off the piano. And she says, I know that you're hoodwinking me. She said, I know that you're getting me to play the pieces for you, which I said, could you just play it again? Then I didn't have to practice. I would just go in and just play it for her. And she said, what we need to do is put those big, wonderful ears to work.
So she taught you how to reharmonize, how to add chords, how to fill in.
Yeah. I don't want to misquote Leonard Bernstein. He called them transformational elements.
Right.
So transformational elements, I mean, the whole key to that, a chord doesn't have to have a root for a bass note. It can have any bass note. And all of a sudden, this whole beautiful diatonic world like opens up, and you're just sort of saying, wow, I can just press down on these keys any way I want.
Right.
And that's the first time you do that, it's like creativity floods through you, and you go, oh, this could be something. This could be something exciting, you know. I remember being 12 years old and writing a song that was eventually recorded by Art Garfunkel called Someone Else. It's someone else. I've known it all the time. Known that you're not mine. And will never be. It's someone else. I saw you out last night. I got to play the bridge. Oh, I really can't hate him for what's happening to me. Will happen to him. That's a certainty. And this is the key. You have to button it up. For he'll learn there's always someone else, like I learned myself. Always someone else. So I was 12 years old. And when I listen to that in retrospect, I see it's got all of its parts. Mm-hmm. It's got a beginning, it's got a middle, and it's got an end. It has a sustainable thematic quality. The tune is not unpleasant to me, and it has beautiful chord structure. So that leapt into my mind, fully formed. And all I can imagine is that on some subliminal level, that for years my brain was working with computing, making decisions, and I know that arranging church music, doing funerals, doing offertories, looking for different moods, if you will, for different occasions or whatever, and being instrumental in my father's hands as a minister, and actually going on the road with him.
Okay.
My first taste of show business, and watching people's reaction to also accompanying singers. I did hours and hours of accompanying soloists. That's the thing that I used most when I got into the record business, serious for life and death.
Right.
Was that I could accompany vocalists, and that is just like something that you really need to be able to do, because you're working with singers, you're demoing, you're saying I'm with you and I need to show you something. I could work in different keys, so there's certain advantages to having no education whatsoever musically, because there's a pure,
right.
There's the avatar that sort of comes out of that situation in a violently unique, creative way that unmistakable. And then there's something to be said for being literate.
Yes.
Being able to read, to write a little music, maybe.
Jimmy, how would you memorialize your songs when you would write them? Did you have a recorder, or would you simply write the chord chart and melody out?
I actually used to do lead sheets for a living.
Okay.
That's one of the sort of byproducts of knowing how to read music.
Yeah.
I could do lead sheets, and most of the time I would be writing my music out. I never had a staff. I never had orchestrators. When you hired me, you might not like the result, but you got me. I'm kind of proud of that fact, actually. And I know that it pushed me towards a more conservative musical atmosphere. And I was palatable to artists like Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett. Barbra Streisand recorded my songs before anybody. And for that reason, I struggled a lot in my formative years, sometimes not too successfully, but I just really want to be Crosby, Stills, and Nash. I just want to be one of the guys. I'll do the lyrics. I want to be on the road. I want to ride on the bus. Mm-hmm. I just want to be cool like you guys, And I'm surrounded by all these guys in Hollywood.
So having all the big hit songs didn't really didn't do it then, Jimmy?
Well, that's the thing. You have to be careful what you pray for.
Right. Right.
Because if you leave anything out, you can't go back and make up. So, I said, "Dear Lord, I want to be a songwriter. I want to record music with Glen Campbell." And it was like, "Coming right up, sir." But I forgot to add, and I want to be a recording artist in my own right, and I want to, tour the world, and I want to be Billy Joel. And I didn't. I got what I asked for, and the deal's a deal.
When I made my episode about Wichita Lineman, I thought, I had all my friends would call me and they say, "Wow, that's so great that you made the episode of Wichita Lineman." I mean, so many people that I didn't know that was their favorite song. That musician friends of mine that I've known forever. When Glenn was going to do this song, do the recording of it, did you know that he was going to record it?
Al and Glenn cut virtually in a hyperbaric chamber.
Okay.
I mean, they were sealed off.
Okay.
For years, I was never even invited to
Wow.
one of Glenn's sessions.
Interesting.
When we did Wichita Lineman, he was over at my house one day, and I said, "You know what, Glenn?" I said, "I got this old church organ that I just play it when I'm, kind of in the mood for a hymn or two."
Okay.
And I said, "It's got some really interesting synth stuff on it. Now, this is pre-synthesizer. But you'd get yourself like a $5,000 Gould Branson electronic organ, church organ. It had all these bells and whistles on it. It had sustain. It had a repetitive. It would do that. And there was this one repetitive thing. And I said, at the very end of the record." Al's just going like, he's just doing something very simple.
Yeah.
So I was like I went over and I turned on this ring-a-ding thing, and I held down 2 notes here, and it went. He said, "Wow." He said, "That's cool." I said, "Yeah, it sounds like a satellite or a, yeah." He said, "That's cool." He said, "Let's put it on the record, I said, "What? When?" He said, "Now." And I said, "Glenn," I said, that weighs like 1,000 pounds, Where's the phone?" He said, "SIR." He says, "Shorty?" He said, "I need you guys over here with a truck right now." That's the way Glenn was. So SIR came over to the house then, loaded this big church organ, massive thing, into the back of the truck. We went down to Western 3, and we put it on the record.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
that was an overdub later, right?
By that time, it was dark, and we went into the studio, and they pulled out Wichita Lineman. I believe it was an 8-track master. Wow! They played it, and we got over it, and Al said, "Okay, well, let's put it on the intro too," because they liked it.
I want to play it.
You can hear it. I think probably more on the fade than anywhere else, but. That's it.
They heard perfectly.
That's all I'm doing.
I am a lineman for the county, and I drive the main road.
Did you know James Taylor covered this?
Yes.
He did a beautiful job too. It's hard to beat this.
I hear you singing in the wire. I can hear you through the whine.
It's just the right sound.
Yes. Oh,
and
beautiful.
The Wichita line.
Simple move, huh?
Yes. All those
is still on
counterlines are amazing. Okay, so that tag at the end of the chorus there, the B flat to C, and you have the 9th on the C chord, is so beautiful. It's so modern sounding, and that's the thing that when I was a kid, that grabbed my ear, and I've never heard that before. This is just the way that you heard things. So the song starts F, C sus or C9, then it goes to B flat in the beginning of the verse. Now, was that the way that it was in that key originally or not?
Let me tell you a parable. I'll tell you a story. Okay. I'm at home one night, and the phone, somebody calls, and Laura picks up the phone, and she says, "Jimmy," she said, "it's James." And I said, "I think it's my 3rd oldest son." Taylor. I went over to the phone and I said, hello, and it was James. And he said, hey, how you doing? He says, listen, I'm sitting here and I'm playing Wichita Lineman. He says, I thought you told me this was in F. And I said, well, it is. It's in F. He said, it never goes to F. So I said, are you sure? And he said, yeah, I'm pretty sure. He said, I've been through it several times now. I said, we'll talk about this later. I got to check this out. So really, to me, this song is clearly an F. It starts on a B flat over C.
Yeah.
And then goes to a B flat major 7.
That's right. Then A minor
This is
7. F over A over F.
Yeah.
Or F over A, I mean.
Either that or F sus2 over A.
Yeah.
Now it's back to the B flat over
That's
C.
right. Yeah.
It's a if you want, it's like an F with no third over D, or it's a D minor. This would be an A minor.
Yeah. Then G sus
To D.
to D. Ah.
To C.
G over B. Yep.
I put that in.
Over B flat. I love that.
That's a D.
Yep.
G over A.
Yep.
And then B major 7. Never goes to F.
Right.
Ever, but it is in F.
When you go to that second chord of the verse, the F sus2 over A, that was such a modern sound back then. That was something that those were voices that you liked the sound of, right?
Well, I like the sound of Burt Bacharach.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the sound of George Martin and the Beatles.
Yes.
And I think that George had a wonderful influence on the way the Beatles harmonized their songs.
Yes.
And having worked with him personally, I can say that he was one of the great gentlemen who ever lived. And it was just a privilege to know him. But I was in awe of him. When I heard Eleanor Rigby, I thought I was going to pass out. That he would have the kind of skill to do that. Even though there was a guy named Joshua Rifkin. Did you ever hear of him?
I've heard his name.
Joshua Rifkin did the cantata for Shea Stadium,
Okay.
which is a pastiche of all the Beatles songs, but done Brandenburg Gate style.
Okay.
Very, very J.S. Bach, go for Barouch, type of a scene.
Right.
A lot of it pretty hilarious to listen to because I'll cry instead. Until then, you better hide all the girls. Break their hearts all around the world. Yes, I'm gonna break them in two. But it was all it was all beautiful. He was a brilliant guy, and he had a tremendous, wonderful sense of humor. Thank God someone did make this album, Cantata for Shea Stadium, because it was really a kind of a send-up of the fusion between rock and classical music, which was actually taking place.
Right.
It had actually been taking place for a long time. It started with Benny King, Stand By Me. It actually, before him, Buddy Holly, Norman Petty arranged True Love Ways in Clovis, New Mexico. I don't know where he got the players, but that's where the studio was.
Yeah,
And it
right
was
on the border of Texas, right near Lubbock, not far from Lubbock. Yeah.
I can't do Buddy Holly, but just you know why you and I will by and by know true love ways. Sometimes we'll cry, sometimes we'll sigh. Just you and I know true love ways, that silly way that he sung everything.
So the fusion of classical music and rock music was something. Popular music was happening
in
for
progress.
Yeah.
And it was and one of
But
the
accelerated by George Martin with the Beatles arrangements.
In the same breath, you can't underestimate Burt Bacharach.
Right.
He had studied with Nina Rota.
Yeah.
So when he came back, here is the guy who's really been trained to be a classical composer.
Yes.
And he decides to take the road less traveled, and ends up like writing "Baby, It's You," sha la la, 'cause baby, it's you. Tears your heart out.
Yes.
Right? So it started very simply, and I described it once because I wrote a book called Inside the Art of Songwriting. And I think that I some people may think I'm a little bit opinionated, and they'd be right. But I felt that, I said it in the book, that I feel like the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and partially the 50s, were an orgy of chromaticism. There was just think about Rhapsody in Blue, or think about country music. Think about any kind of music you want to think of.
Yeah.
And even and particularly jazz was incredibly chromatic. So when Burt came along, and the Beatles to some degree, they were again drawing on the Baroque realm, which is far enough back in time. It was actually relatable to teenagers. It was diatonic music.
Yeah.
So, if you see me walking down the street, I just can't get over it. Where's it gone now? You said goodbye. Walk on up. That's classical influence. Burt, and then Cynthia Wilde.
Oh yeah.
Who was the composer with their husband Barry Mann of You've Lost That Love and Feeling.
Yeah.
When I was chairing the Songwriters Hall of Fame, we created a word called the Towering Song, and that was like, I think, the third year we gave it out, and it was clear this was a towering song. But I'll give you one guess who the arranger was on it.
George Martin.
No, it was Marty Page.
Okay.
So we're back to Marty Page.
Marty, okay.
The guy who wrote Johnny Rivers' arrangement for By the Time I Get to Phoenix, which was then influential as Al DeLore took over the controls.
Yeah.
That has to be the most epic of all the Wagnerian epic love songs. And a lot of it was just the terpsichore, the little spirit, blithe spirit that sort of flies through the room in the recording studio. And Carol Kay says, I think I'll play. And nobody knows what it's going to be. but it sounds good.
Right.
They start playing. Down on my knees for you. It gets grand. And Phil Spector, he wasn't afraid of the orchestra. Mm-hmm. He invited the orchestra in. And so it kind of became okay to have orchestra on rock and roll records up to a point, and then it became not okay again.
When was that when then it became not okay?
Beatles' White Album put a quash on a lot of things.
Because why? Why do you think?
Because, you just look at the songs that they recorded. Get back to where you once belonged. It was like, we've gone too far out, we've gone too far now. And I think they even talked about it. I think it was something that was discussed to some degree in terms of their motivation and what is this album? Well, we're getting back to rock and roll. I remember that clearly. One evening at Richard Harris, we were in London working on an album, and Richard Harris took me over to Terence Stamp's apartment. Uh-huh. And he had a test pressing. I don't know where he had gotten it, but it was Tommy by The Who.
Wow.
And I thought, it's happening. It's happening. Rock and roll is going to take over Broadway, and it's going to be in the concert hall. It's going to be everywhere. I sort of overestimated its potential in that regard. But still you had the occasional album coming along and making brilliant work of, for instance, one that comes to mind is my friend Harry Nilsson's album, A Little Touch of Schmielsen in the Night, which was arranged by Gordon Jenkins.
Yeah.
The Silver Fox.
Amazing.
The most elegant, of all, maybe, some people think Don Costa edged him out. I don't think so. I don't think you could put a human hair between Don Costa, Nelson Riddle, and Gordon Jenkins.
When you think about a song like Wichita Lineman, how did it even work then? Because there was nothing like it. There were no lyrics like that, really.
Actually, I would reply with two names, Simon and Garfunkel.
Okay.
There was a whole generation of college or nearly college-educated kids. Some of them dropped out, but everybody had a taste of English lit, and most people had read Dylan Thomas.
Yeah.
Some people had been fortunate enough to read Patrick Cavanaugh and, some of the other, Pablo Neruda and some of the, brilliant lights of poetic, not, some people knew, had even read Ezra Pound. Oops. But I think that Dylan Thomas was a tremendous influence on my generation's lyric writing.
I'm going through Simon & Garfunkel songs. I'm thinking of The Boxer or Bridge Over Troubled Water or The Sound of Silence. They still have a almost like a New York feel to them, I think. Right?
I think it's there.
Something
tells me it's all happening at the zoo, man.
Right. Exactly.
I like it. I love him. So
let's talk about another one of your big hits, Up, Up and Away. This is a totally different kind of a song. I want to play the beginning of it.
Okay.
Would you like to ride in my beautiful balloon? Would you like to
That's Al Casey.
ride in my beautiful balloon? We could float among the stars together, you and
That's
I.
Marty Page.
For we can fly
Beautiful.
up and away, my beautiful balloon. The world's a nicer place in my beautiful balloon. It wears a nicer face in my beautiful.
Bud Shank is still blowing away.
He's in from the last
Somebody,
session. So
they definitely hired Bud Shank.
I want to say something. So Marty Page is David Page's dad.
Yeah, yeah.
David Patriot was in Toto and wrote many big songs.
David was always around the studio as a 10,
kid?
11-year-old, 12-year-old kid. Wonderful kid.
Yeah.
And turned out to be a close friend and a wonderful man.
Yes. And a
quite
fantastic writer and musician.
You know, the piano, you know, it talks back to him.
Yes.
You know, it's a thing to behold, really.
So this song, though, the voicing's right in the beginning. The dum, da, dum, dum, da, dum. These things really spoke to me as a kid. The way that the song turns around and changes keys, moves to places you don't expect. And this is kind of your thing.
I was under the influence of the Association when I wrote that song. And strangely enough, Glen Campbell fashioned the intro to Along Comes Mary.
Yes.
Lots of seconds and
Yeah.
sixes. You know. And so it was something like that, Along Comes Mary. Up, Up and Away was suggested to me about in a conceptual way by a fad that was sweeping Southern California, which was hot air ballooning. Mm-hmm. I remember the first time that I stood in the basket underneath a hot air balloon. And the wonderful thing about hot air balloons is that they're open at the bottom. They have to be because that's where the hot air gets in.
Right.
And you're constantly replenishing the hot air with, unlike a helium balloon, which is a closed container, so you can't look up inside a helium balloon. But you can look up inside. You can see the architecture, the inner architecture of a hot air balloon. And it's most gorgeous. It's a cathedral. Mm-hmm. It's a cathedral of colored light. And not only that, it's floating through the air. It's flying. And it's taking you with it. I mean, what could be more fantastically wonderful than that?
This is a very psychedelic type song,
yeah,
though.
it is.
Well, it really is a psychedelic song.
It's a psychedelic thing to do.
Yeah.
You don't even need the psychedelics.
Right.
You just do this and you go, wow, this is a turn on. In fact, this has been an interesting interview because it's hit on so many things. It seems coincidental. But Up, Up and Away was banned on the radio, banned in the Midwest.
Okay.
The first station that stopped playing it was KOMA, Oklahoma City. It's my hometown.
Nothing personal.
And the reason that they stopped playing it was because it was about drugs. Mm-hmm. And while I've written songs about a lot of different things, in fact, many times I've been accused of being on drugs when I wrote MacArthur Park. Mm-hmm.
That was an unexpected hit, wasn't it?
It was like a bolt from the blue.
Right.
We were making this record in London and drinking a lot of Pimm's and a lot of Richard Harris loved Black Velvets. Black Velvet was half Guinness and half champagne.
Okay.
You have 2 or 3 of those and you're on the floor. You're fat. You are. He's not.
Right.
He's just getting warmed up. So we're doing this professional drinking course, touring all the hot, spots in Chelsea and Soho and around, and every once in a while getting down to this little kind of a modest studio on Lansdowne Road, and people say there was no such place, but there was a Lansdowne studio on Lansdowne Road. So please, no letters, no cards. Small studio called Lansdowne Recorders.
Okay. Nobody
Nobody remembers it because it was ephemeral. And we would go in there and with a pitcher of Pimm's, you put it on some sort of a stand or a stool where he could reach it, and then he would start singing we would sing until the Pimm's was gone, and then we would all try to pack up and get into the limo and get home again. So we were having the best time, and he said to me, Jimmy Webb, he said, what can I say? This will be a #1 record and I'm going to be a pop star. Why not?
Right. Right.
And it was a crazy time. I don't think we thought too much about it couldn't happen. I mean, by then, when you've been magically transported from the panhandle of Oklahoma, like a wheat field and a town that maybe has 300 or 400 people in it, and you've been like dropped into 60s culture in Southern California.
Right, anything's possible then.
I rest my case, So, and then once you've had a couple of records under your belt, and this is the dangerous part, you start thinking, hey, I can do this anytime I want. Mm-hmm. Not really.
And do other people think that too?
I think they do.
Do other people think that just because you've had these other hits, that songs are hits, that songs actually get a shot because of being successful?
A lot of songs that are first of all, making notes. First of all, a lot of songs are very, very successful that aren't very good songs. Mm-hmm. So let's just get that one out of the way.
Absolutely.
And that was always true, by the way. Mm-hmm. That's not
something of today. This has always historically been true. Yes.
Noel Coward said, "How potent cheap music is." It's one of his great quotes. So you can definitely have success without doing all the right things. But I always felt like it was better to do all the right things and to be happy enough with a song that I wouldn't mind playing it for a friend.
Right.
Or for my girlfriend, even more importantly. I always tried to do good work. That's all I can say. I don't understand not wanting to do good work. And so when I think of songwriters, I think of people like John Hartford, who wrote Gentle on My Mind, Don Schlitz, who wrote The Gambler. People talk about Wichita Lineman being a perfect song. The Gambler's a perfect song.
Great song.
I mean, it's a great story. What a tale.
Yes.
And told like epically, right?
Yes.
And what an ending. Those are the things that turn me on. It's like, man, that is perfection. And I've told him so. I've told him down to his face, put my arms around him and said, man, that is as good as it gets. And if I ever fail to, if I'm unable to be that enthusiastic about someone else's work, please take me out and shoot me. Mm-hmm. Because then it's all over. I love songs. I love songwriters. I love Brian Wilson. I love the way Brian Wilson sings. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I took Brian Wilson to Rosemary Clooney's funeral.
Wow.
And I sat with Brian. One night at the Riviera Hotel, I was sitting in an artist dressing room waiting to see Tony Martin. We go back to Tony Martin. Before I played, by the time I get to Phoenix for him, I was sitting back there noodling around on Didn't We? I'm actually just humming it to myself. I've got my music, and I'm going to go in and play it from. And there's a man in shadow sitting on the couch over there, and it was a break room. Musicians slept in there all the time, because even a guy like Louis Armstrong, he would be doing 7 shows a day. 7 shows a day. Bill Medley told me this not 2 weeks ago. He says, Bobby and I used to do 7 shows a day. Wow. And they were short shows. They were
but still
45, 50 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
But all day long. And
so
there's this guy's like, trying to, sort of nap or something. I can tell that he's an African American guy, and he's holding a horn, and he's asleep, and I guess I might have crinkled my papers, and he sort of roused him, and he looked over and he said, "Who's that?" He said, "Let me see that." And he took my music out of my hand, and he picks up this old horn, and he begins to play this tune. Plays a phrase. And it was like the sky opened. That was Louis Armstrong. Wow. And he said, "Hey kid," he said, "this is pretty good." He said, "You stick with it." And and I'm going, and he kind of winked, and somebody said, 5 minutes, Mr. Armstrong.
Wow.
And he got up, and he kind of straightened himself out, and, got to get those naps in, And he started out to do his show, and I thought he was gone, and I just saw his head pop back into the frame of the doorway, and he said, stick with it.
Wow. That's amazing.
And I never saw him again.
Wow.
And but I was fortunate enough to be walking around on the street when these people we were there together. It was a magic, wonderful thing. Sometimes I could become melancholy about it, really, because the 60s were such a wonderful time for music. And the 70s really continued that tradition for a long time, because you had, now in the 70s, you have James Taylor, you have Jackson, you have Joni,
Yep.
you have Sting, you have still lots of wonderful, wonderful talent. The Eagles, great songs being written. Linda Ronstadt's like socking it to them, every time she puts out a record. Listen, the 70s were not shabby for recordings. There was only a kind of a gradual decline in one of the problems with maintaining the standards that we had, and they were standards, was that we're all dying out. And in the case of Linda, she doesn't perform anymore.
Yeah.
And Glen's, and as you know, for very good causes.
Yeah.
Very serious causes. And Glen,
Yeah.
he's gone. Richard died years ago.
Yeah, he did.
So, I think it's interesting because life is meant to be a complete experience. So this is not really the heady, giddy part of the experience. Being in your 70s. It doesn't mean you have to be miserable. It doesn't mean that you can't still write a song or an arrangement or produce an album or get an idea. But you're a little more reflective at 70 than you are at 20. When you're 20, you can throw lightning bolts. I really mean that. I mean, I believe you can. I believe that you have those abilities. You have these godlike abilities. Youth is this amazing thing, this belief, this energy that can focus the way it does. It's an amazing thing.
To get to meet you, for me, Jimmy, and hear you play and talk to you about these songs that you've written is an amazing thing.
Thank you.
So much.
Thanks for having me.
I really
It's been
appreciate
an
it.
honor to be here. Thanks.
Thanks.